Well, we're here today in the Curtis restoration shop. We're working on the P-40, and we're going to go into the history of this airframe, what happened to it, when it was manufactured. The serial number for this aircraft is number 4324362, and it came off the Curtis assembly line in Buffalo, New York, and I think it was early November of 1943. This aircraft was being used in Florida at Camp Perry Army Air Corps Base, right off the Swanee River, and Camp Perry would be up here, and they were being used as a high-performance advanced trainer. They had 13,760 plus planes built, all in Buffalo, New York. So they had a lot of them. And they were using them as you progressed up the line as a pilot. You would then get to a high performance and use this as training. They were on an exercise. They were going out over the Gulf on a navigational problem. And then they were going to go up the Swanee River to the gunnery range. They were fully armed, and they had a gun camera on board. And this gentleman, they were in a flight of 4. The pilot of this aircraft was, his name was Earl Goodyear. And they were in a flight of 4. They were coming up the Swanee River, coming down in a shallow dive, and switching from echelon left to echelon right, when this gentleman's wingman dodged a flock of birds. And when he did, he got too close and he chopped the tail of this aircraft completely off. So Mr. Goodyear was going at fairly high speed, low level, and he no longer had any tail surfaces, so he automatically went nose down into the ground. He unfortunately was killed instantly, and I try to tell all the people that come in this museum from December 7th, 1941 to the end of August 1945, just in the continental 48 states, there were on average 11 Army Air Corps deaths per day just in training, and that was just the Army Air Corps, so that would be over 330 per month just in training. It's a dangerous, dirty business. So we have the plane crashed off the Swanee River. It was about 600 yards off the main channel. It was far enough up the river that it was in totally fresh water, partially brackish, but mostly fresh water. And it fell in a cypress swamp, which was quite remote. Even people today come up from down there and say nobody really goes out there because it's so nasty out there with the mosquitoes and alligators and snakes and stuff. Nobody really goes out there. So the gentleman who it actually crashed, the Army Air Corps went in to retrieve the body. They also demilled or demilitarized the 50 caliber machine guns. And if you pan over to the table here, there is a 50 which came off of this aircraft. They actually cut the receiver on the other side, cut notches in it so it could never be used again, and left them in place because it was such a nasty area. They didn't want to pump them out of there, so they just left them. Two of the propellers, because the engine was still turning when she hit, were in a corkscrew pattern, which is indicative of an engine that's still turning when the wingtips hit the ground. It's twisted into a corkscrew. So two of them were totally damaged beyond repair, and the third was still usable. So instead of they didn't want to haul them out of there, so they poured acid on it and destroyed it. And actually, we were taking the exhaust off of the one side of the engine, and 3 of them came off, and they're quite light actually. And the 4th one came off, and I almost dropped it on my foot. It was full of propeller slag that had been dissolved with the acid and settled in there. So it crashed in March of 1945, and the accident occurred in March of 1945. And the original owner of the aircraft is a gentleman, this gentleman here in the photos, white-haired gentleman. And in that photograph, he's actually about 12 feet down in the muck trying to get the engine, because it had buried itself in the muck about 12 feet. And they dug it out and had to pump all day to get the water out, and then tried to haul it out of there. So it sat there from 45 to 86, over 40 years in the swamp. And that gentleman, the first owner, was actually after the aircraft that hit this aircraft. That pilot passed away about 1.5 years ago, and he said that when we contacted him, he said that horrible day. It was a bad day, horrible day. So he said when the collision occurred, he had damage to his propellers, and the engine was vibrating very badly because of the imbalance in the propellers. So he feathered them and pulled back and got as much altitude as he could with the momentum he had. Flipped it over and bailed out. And he said he was very lucky though. His parachute canopy opened just as he was hitting the top of the trees, and as he hit the top of the trees, it yanked him back. And a few seconds he was on the ground. So he was very lucky to have survived it. So the crash site in '86, the original owner was after the aircraft that hit this one. It fell near, I believe it's called Cross City, and a little village near there. And unfortunately, it fell near the village, and it was picked over quite a bit, so there wasn't too much remaining of it. So while he was there, an old timer came up to him and said, well, what about the other one out in the swamp? And took him out there and showed him where this airframe was. So the original owner worked 3 years. He could only work for a couple months in the wintertime because it was too nasty in the summertime to go out there. He said the mosquitoes would carry you away. So he took him 3 years. They got it out on a barge on a little boat out to a barge on the Swanee River, and got her out. They actually put it out on a field. They took the pieces and laid it out as the plane would look, somewhat. And that's basically the pieces of the aircraft. Now we have here, this little table is full of instruments and pistons. This is an actual piston out of this engine. The engine we have in the aircraft is just a shell. The crank was sold off, and some of the pistons were sold off. And so it's just basically a shell. We do have some pistons. This is a radial relay, and we have a turn indicator. This is interesting. It's a gun camera, and this aircraft was fitted with a gun camera because they were going to the gunnery range. And It was not fitted in place of a 50 cal. There was a separate spot on the fairing to the landing gear where this was mounted, and it was activated with the gun switch. When the gun switch was triggered, the camera was triggered, and it was packaged so that the film was in a packet, and it was just loaded, you know, as a package, and very simple, very easy. And we're lucky to have it. I believe it was built in Brooklyn, New York. We also have instrument panel here that was from one of the two crash sites. I believe it was this aircraft. We have a very nice instrument panel that we obtained, and that's in the aircraft right now. So that's that. And we have some odds and ends here: spotters guides, and cards with silhouettes of aircraft for identification purposes. So as you're playing cards, you can also hone up on your skills of recognition. So that's about the history. Like I said, the original owner, it went through two other owners. They hauled it around to air shows on a old trailer bed, and we're looking for people to donors to put money in so that they could restore it to flying condition. But there's no way. This aircraft hit at very high speed, not very high speed, but it was going at low altitude, high speed, and there were just bits and pieces left of it. So, and actually we have a short belt of 50 cals that this aircraft would have been spitting out. In combat, they would have been an armor-piercing tip with an incendiary on the back, and then every sixth one, I believe, was a tracer, and so you could see it. And we had a waist gunner from a B-17 in here a couple years ago, and I talked to him for 4 hours about gunnery and stuff, because my father was also a trap shooter, and they did a lot of trap shooting in the Army Air Corps gunnery school. And we were talking about the 50 calibers, and he said, yeah, he said the incendiaries, you could see them, but they had a different trajectory than the others, which I did not know. It was always a little bit off, but you knew where the other rounds were going. Oh well. So I guess the compressor says we're done for the day. Well, that's the history of this aircraft as we know it. And we'll be seeing you some other time.